morning. Welcome to the live broadcast. Bruce Fein is joining us today. Virginia Allen, senior news producer at the Daily Signal, and Kierran Young, U.S. Politics, Public Policy. We welcome all to the broadcast studio. Bruce Fein. Bruce.
Yes, I hear you.
Do you think the assassin, Matthew Crook, died thinking he assassinated Donald Trump?
I don't think I can say with confidence anything. I think that he is someone, he's 20 years old. He obviously had a warped mind, whether he was delirious or not, when he shot. I don't know. He doesn't seem to have a political motivation behind it. He obviously came very close to assassinating him. He killed some others. Whether or not, he said, well, I did my business and at least I died having accomplished my goal. I don't know. We still have a very, very cloudy picture of who this gentleman was and whether there was anything more than just kind of an unbalanced young youth who did this.
Virginia, you think we've heard nothing about the funeral. No matter what a child does, the parents love them unconditionally. And the parents did reach out to law enforcement before he fired the trigger. It's just like an unmarked grave. Nobody cares, nobody wants to know. He will always be in history. Is that what this younger generation wants? They want to go out in a blaze. And he actually think this through. He was on the premise 8 o'clock that morning. For someone to say that he was not in his right mental state, he was in his mental state. He knew exactly what he was doing.
Well, I don't know that you can say that someone that intentionally tries to assassinate a president is for sure in their right mental state.
They are. He almost succeeded. Oh, he is in his right mental state.
I think the tragedy is that he should never have been allowed to try to assassinate.
But many have tried throughout history.
Donald Trump. Well, but hear me out here. He should never have been allowed to even make it onto that roof. From the moment someone saw him in the premises with a scope, he should have been apprehended by law enforcement and held to find out what his motives were, and certainly not released until Trump had left the premises. This whole thing should never have happened from the beginning, and it's such a tragic failure on the part of law enforcement. And now, like you said, a young man is dead. A father, Corey Capratore, is dead. His daughters are not that much younger than myself. They're gonna grow up the rest of their lives without their father, wife without her husband. Civilians are dead because of this tragedy and because of law enforcement, unfortunately, not seeing the signs. Specifically, I applaud those Secret Service men who jumped out and risked their lives, and we're learning more and more about what those breakdowns were, but it is becoming clear that there were major warning signs that just should have been caught beforehand, but tragically were not.
Kierran, welcome back to the broadcast. Did you watch Kimberly Cheetah's brutal hearings today?
Thank you. No, I did not get a chance to watch the full coverage, but I did catch some of it. I was very disappointed in the Secret Service's lack of accountability. Me being from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, I'm glad, Miss Allen, that you brought up the name of Mr. Campitori, who's a volunteer firefighter. I actually know the site very well. It's a fairgrounds. There was actually a water tower that they very could have easily used as a perch. It seems like the Secret Service failed, and we now have a serious issue that we need to look into in the Secret Service. And there have been several problems with the Secret Service dating back to that I can remember back to the Colombia trip during the Obama administration. So I really do think that Congress does need to take a deep dive into what is wrong at the Secret Service. And really what we need to talk about is more funding for law enforcement.
What we're going to do is
I feel like I got a party going on in my ear. There's so many voices going on in my ear tonight. I think I'm at a party. Something's spilling over. I don't know what it is. But my goodness, people applauding and clapping. Are you hearing that?
I'm hearing it.
You hearing
it
too? Oh, maybe something's bleeding. I'm sure they'll figure it out. But anyhow, Bruce, do you think Democrats will pay the price for the big lie in saying that Biden was healthy, in his right frame of mind, energized and ready to do? What am I listening to? Bruce, will the Democrats pay a price for the big lie?
Well, I think they'll pay some price. I think that it was clear they were lying well before the date that Mr. Biden withdrew from the campaign. It was obvious to anyone who wasn't sleepwalking that he was very frail, that he oftentimes looked dazed, he looked mummified, he stopped in midstream, he couldn't remember whether he was vice president. So to that degree, there was already, I think, some price being paid by pretending this gentleman was fully compos mentis when he wasn't. But this kind of just underscores when he withdrew, and it's clearly, whether it's stated or not, because he simply didn't have the physical and mental capability of moving forward, is going to kind of call attention to that, which to me, it makes it seem strange that Trump and the Republicans are calling that he resign immediately so he gets out of the equation. And then you have a younger 59-year-old Kamala Harris to look at in the White House. I mean, I think the Republicans benefit by Biden remaining in the White House and calling attention to how frail and anemic the Democratic Party is.
You know what's fascinating, Virginia, is that Biden privately, this is, my sources are pretty reliable here.
Sure.
Even though he was on a campaign call today, cheering on the campaign workers, that he's going to get behind Vice President Harris, privately, he doesn't believe that the vice president is up to the task of defeating Donald Trump. In fact, before he decided to step down on yesterday, he made it clear that former President Barack Obama, former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Schumer were undermining him, and they underestimated him in 2016 when they looked over him for Hillary Clinton, and they lost. He felt, had he been the nominee, he would have won. There's one thing about old folk, as they say in the South. They speak their mind. When they get to a certain age and a certain stage, they're ornery, they're stubborn, and they don't mince words. And you could begin to see the divide between he and former President Barack Obama. And he also said he was the only person, so we don't repeat that mistake, that could defeat Donald Trump in November.
I think he does really still believe that, and I think he believes it because it wouldn't have taken him this long to drop out if he didn't believe that. I think he is convinced I'm the only one that can beat Trump, and that's why he stayed in so long. I think the reason why he dropped out is because the pressure campaign became so strong, and when you have that many Democrat lawmakers publicly saying you need to drop out, and the polling data. His polling data was starting to really show Trump in the lead, and polling data also shows in a Trump-Kamala Harris matchup that Trump still beats her. So I think you're right. I think Biden was very stubborn in just saying, I'm going to stay in, I'm going to stay in, and it's hard for me to believe that mentally he made that switch that quickly to say, when he was so insistent, I'm the only one that can beat Trump, I'm staying in, to then switch so quickly to be fully backing Kamala Harris. I mean, of course, it was the obvious choice to endorse her. It would be really awkward, quite frankly, if he dropped out and didn't endorse her. He's her VP. He needs to back her fully. But I do think that probably at the end of the day, you're right, that he's convinced that she maybe doesn't have what it takes. I mean, you just look at the reaction on social media. You know, sure, there's some Democrats that seem excited by her. She has, I think, a solid group that are pretty energized by her message.
Sort of like with former presidential candidate Hillary Clinton.
Sure, but even less so. I think Hillary Clinton was seen as someone who was very dignified within the political space by many, and unfortunately, I think Kamala Harris just doesn't quite have that same reputation. There's a mashup that repeatedly circulates and has been back in social media quite frequently. That's a mashup between clips of Kamala Harris and Veep. And just a lot of people have that perspective with the gaffes that she's made. Sometimes she seems to get lost in her words and a little distracted and like she doesn't know what she's saying. And those are things that, sure, you know, when you're kind of in the background in politics, you can get away with. You can't get away with that as a Republican.
You know,
candidate,
Kierran, which brings us to a very interesting point. Nobody could argue about former First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton's credentials. Former Secretary of State, New York State Senator, First Lady for 8 years, a very prominent lawyer. Tell us what the Democratic Party and the mainstream media will need to do over the next couple of months before November 5th to reinvent, to remake, to redo, make me over Vice Presidential Kamala Harris, to manipulate the public and believing that she's not the person that they isolated, gave the border to. When she was overseas speaking in Ukraine, she certainly committed many faux pas. Tell me how they're gonna make her over, and also, and how they get rid of the cackling.
So Armstrong, I'm guessing that's directed at me, being the Democrat on the panel. I really do think the Democratic Party is going to have a major unity problem. They already have a problem in states like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, as well as with black voters in Michigan. All of those places are absolutely necessary for the Democrats to win any national election. And if the Republicans are able to pick off 1 out of every 4 black male voters, the Democrats cannot win in those states and places. So I'm really looking at how they pivot and what the message is going to be. I think there was a consultant who's a bit more wise than me named James Carville who coined the phrase, "It's the economy, stupid." I think you have to get back to talking to people about kitchen table issues and how you're going to make their life better. That's the only way the Democratic Party is going to be able to beat Donald Trump.
You know, as we go out to break, because we're going to come back and delve more into who Vice President Kamala Harris really is. But let's just start here. Everything starts with imagination. I've asked many people on both sides of the aisle throughout the weekend since the president made his announcement. Can you imagine Vice President Kamala Harris as the 47th president of the United States sitting in the White House? And even people who said they were voting for her said, you know what? I never thought about this. Let me think about this. Can you imagine Vice President Kamala Harris standing down Putin, the president of China, being involved in foreign affairs with Gaza and Netanyahu? And just think about this. Netanyahu, we're going to get into this on when we come back, is speaking before a joint session of Congress on Wednesday. And you know what the vice president has already said? She will not stand in her position because she does not want to stand beside Netanyahu. This is what someone is saying who wants to be president of the United States, who, as a diplomat, the chief diplomat, will have to build relationships because there are so many crises in the world, refuses to be at his State of the Union. And we'll be back. And welcome back to the broadcast. So Bruce Fein, the vice president will not be in her role in the joint, in the state of his address before the joint Congress. But tell us, what do we know about the vice president, and what is it going to take? And let me just ad lib here a little. There is no way that they're going to have another woman on the ticket with her. Cannot win. There's no way they're going to have Wes Moore on the ticket with her, no matter how brilliant and how wonderful he is. Cannot win. We know that she must probably select a governor from North Carolina or Illinois or from a blue state, or if she were smart, if I were advising her, I would say, Madam Vice President, you should select a Republican as your running mate. Bruce Fein.
Well, that would be a true novelty. I don't think it's happened in modern times where any candidate of a major party selected someone from the opposite party to run as vice president, especially since who knows what could happen. If the president vacates, that means the other party now captures the White House. I don't think that's a risk many people are taking. But I think the question you have is a good one with regard to Kamala Harris. But I think in some respects, we need to remember that when President Obama was president, Netanyahu came and visited. He spoke to a joint session of Congress. He didn't even visit Obama. He clearly snubbed the president of the United States. So I'm not sure he has the moral standing to object if Kamala Harris says, well, I don't want to be around when you're speaking either. I think Mr. Netanyahu displayed kind of an arrogance to a country that gives Israel $3-4 billion every year, stands sturdily behind Israel at the United Nations Security Council. So this might be something might you call payback. Now, I'm somebody who doesn't believe in payback. I think you should respect foreign leaders no matter what. You should never be petulant. But there has to be some context on that score as to why there might be a reluctance to someone who's been so arrogant himself. I do think it's going to harm her, however, politically, because it makes her look small rather than large. We don't want small people in the White House.
Kierran, obviously with Pelosi coming out today, endorsing her, you probably assume it's just a matter of time before former President Obama does the same. And I think the real reason why is party unity. They have no room to be divisive. They must unify this party. They must come out with one voice at this Democratic convention. But do you still think there could be an open convention and something could absolutely disrupt her path to the majority of the delegates pledging to her? Kierran. Well,
I'll jump in.
Please.
Well, I think yes. I think there can always be something that disrupts. I think there can always be a last-minute surprise. It seems right now like Kamala Harris is on a pretty straight path forward, but I don't think we can totally rule out Michelle Obama quite yet. And I was interested to see that with so many endorsements, the Clintons endorsing Kamala Harris, that the Obamas didn't, that former President Barack Obama said, we're going to trust this process, we're going to trust the party to pick the right candidate. And it just, I think, makes everyone wonder, okay, is there something happening behind the scenes? Now, Michelle Obama has been very clear she does not want to run. This isn't a position she's interested in. At the same time, I still think we cannot completely rule out her as a dark horse.
Bruce, what about RFK Jr.? What role can he play? How can he take advantage of this sudden withdrawal by President Biden?
Well, I'm not sure that it boosts his independent candidacy. He obviously can't return to the Democrats and throw his hat into the ring. It was unclear all along to me whether he is going to be more damaging in his candidacy to those who would vote for Democrats as opposed to Republicans. He doesn't have any clear mission or orientation, I think. He has his own personal problems that kind of swallow him up. The things that have happened that are a reminder of Hunter Biden himself with his derelictions as youth, and not just an isolated case, but kind of over a long period of time. So I don't really think Robert Kennedy Jr. is going to have any impact really at all in this race.
But what about Donald Trump forming an alliance with him?
Well, that assumes that that Robert Kennedy Jr. would carry more Democrats with him than Republicans. That's not at all clear to me. That if you look at his philosophy and what he stated, that's the case. I mean, his big thing, of course, was about COVID and all the vaccines are wrong and we're getting poisoned, whatever there. he's not going to draw votes away from Kamala Harris with those viewpoints. And I also think that with regard to, moving forward here, that the Republicans are best off just letting Kamala Harris stew in her own suit. I think you were right. She doesn't have a whole lot of credentials, which seems incredulous to me that the Republicans seem to be clamoring that she should be president and Joe Biden should step aside. I mean, be careful what you wish for. You might get it, right? That just seems very, very, very odd to me.
Do we have Kierran back? Kierran, can you hear us? I guess not. What about, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
What is it? What does she need in a running mate?
She needs a governor like Josh Shapiro. Like you said, she needs somebody with strong executive experience. But if you are looking for a compromise, I think former governor of West Virginia and former senator, retiring Senator Joe Manchin, might actually be able to help the Democrats win back voters that feel ignored by the Democratic Party. When I lived in the state of West Virginia, Joe Manchin always made his campaigns about the people of West Virginia first, not the Beltway, not the lobbyists. And I think that's the type of person that you need on a ticket. But also, to your point about some of the problems that we have with Israel, a potential Josh Shapiro, Governor Josh Shapiro from Pennsylvania would also make a ton of sense, in my opinion.
So listen, are the Democrats stuck with Vice President Kamala Harris because of the sudden withdrawal by President Biden? If they have more time, clearly they know this is going to be a very tough race for them to win. Very, very tough. They got to put out all the stops, and they've got to hope that fate somehow now steps in and help them along the way. Do you really believe that it is their ideal choice? They don't want to lose their strongest constituency, the minority vote, which would be a major revolt, and maybe with some women if they decided to step over Kamala Harris. And also, do you believe, like in the case of Hillary Clinton, many women did not vote for her? Is she a shoo-in to get the majority of women vote and the black vote?
No, I do not believe so. I believe that we're looking at a situation that is Hillary Clinton all over again. The Democratic Party is going to try to clear the way for her at a convention. And like people have been saying, like J.D. Vance, they want to throw out 14 million votes and basically just say it's just the delegates inside who are at the convention and insiders that are going to get to pick the president of the United States and the vice president as well. I think it causes a massive issue with the trust of the voter. And what I think is really the biggest issue is that going forward, it's going to be even harder to unify the middle of the center of the party and the far left of the Democratic Party.
So an interesting insight. I heard the Trump team request that the next debate is not on ABC, but on Fox News. And clearly, there's nobody they can debate until after the Democratic convention, when we come full circle with whom the nominee is. But what does Trump have to gain or lose by debating the vice president if she's the nominee? And should he just altogether not debate her?
I think the American people need to see a debate between them. I think in fairness, especially given the fact that for the Democrats, they never had a chance in a primary to vote for Kamala Harris. So I think we owe it in many ways. The candidates owe it to, if Kamala Harris is the candidate or whoever it is, they owe it to the American people to put those two individuals on the stage and have them answer questions specifically about how they would lead on issues of foreign policy, on issues of the southern border, on the economy, on health care. And we, of course, already know where Trump stands on those issues, but it's not only, I think, to see the issues, but also, okay, how do these individuals perform under pressure? And I feel like that's really a critical aspect of this process, is to let the voter actually see for themselves, okay, what do these candidates believe?
Bruce, I would be actually surprised if former President Trump debates her.
Well, first of all, your question is a good one. It's not clear to me that Trump should do anything other than what we used to call the Rose Garden strategy for presidents. I think he has momentum. He has an edge. Why is he elevating her to his stature? But assuming that, he does debate, I mean, there's, as you know, just a week or 2 weeks is a light year in politics. We just don't, and the issues change every day as to what's the front burner issue that could move voters one way or the other. I really do not believe that a debate is going to shift and bring out any kind of new statement. But you always have the risk. You remember Gerald Ford, the Soviet Union doesn't dominate Poland, probably lost him the election to Jimmy Carter. So there can always be those kind of gaffes. And I think both Kamala Harris and Biden, given their lack of, deep knowledge and sophistication, could make a gaffe like that and then cause them a whole lot of loss. But at present, assuming that they are cautious, I don't see the debate one way or the other pushing Americans towards one candidate or the other. Remember, we're living in the digital age. It's not like before where the television and the Kennedy-Nixon debates were ways in which, for the first time, the voters knew the candidates. I mean, this is saturated, and all the American people know all the candidates. They're in the media 24/7, certainly the social media. So the importance of the politics and the vision on television becomes much less than it was in previous years.
When we come back, we're going to come back to you, Kierran. Just hold tight. We're going to talk about what really is going to decide this election. What is the policies of both candidates? And does it resonate with the values and the direction of the American people? Whether it's immigration, whether it's inflation, whether it's the economy and jobs, whether should we give more money to Ukraine, how involved should we be involved in foreign wars and foreign conflict? Will Americans be first again? How do we help them solve their issues at the grocery store where prices continue to surge and at the pump? Those issues that impact their lives every day. What policies are both advocating? Because you can have Vice President Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket, but if she's advocating the same policies that have been clearly rejected by the American people across the board, because Trump was leading before, his lead has increased in the battleground states. It's not because Biden has dropped out, Kamala Harris is ascending, it's because people are rejecting their policies. And we'll be back.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. The vice president gave her first speech today since President Biden has withdrawn from the race, and she was talking about his legacy as if he had died. And 5 minutes into the speech, she cackled. She just can't help from the laughter. It's just, and I just wish you could see the post on social media where people were so hyped up. But what was fascinating about it is what young people had to say. I mean, they were disappointed because, I mean, you got to have the president, but you got to have something to say. And I must admit, over the last several months, they have put her on script. She has done much better when she's on script, but when she's unscripted, it can just be a disaster. But Bruce, let me start with you, Kierran. What about the policies of both parties and what the American people are looking for?
Well, I think the American people want to hear about which party is going to make their life better and who is going to bring more jobs into our economy, because right now people are worried about illegal immigration and people are losing jobs to illegal immigrants. And the Democrats are going to have to find a way to address those issues that are affecting the people of Pennsylvania, the people of Wisconsin, the people of Ohio, the people of New Mexico, as well as Arizona and Nevada. And as of right now, the math does not look great for Vice President Harris.
Bruce?
I think the best campaign theme for the Republicans are what Ronald Reagan ran on when he was opposed by Jimmy Carter in 1980. Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago when Mr. Carter took the presidency? It's a very simple observation and comparison to make. And that's an easy one that people understand. Where were they 4 years ago when Biden took office, and where are they now? And for most of them, it's not going to be very positive. In some sense, I think those will be very, very important, how the people vote. But the larger issue that confronts the country that transcends the two parties, and I keep coming to that, we got a $35 trillion national debt that's projected to be $50 trillion. At some point, we will be paying the entire budget, the carrying cost of those trillions of dollars of debt. And neither party is paying any attention to that. This cannot go on forever. You can't keep borrowing your way into solvency. And that seems to me a real worry for the whole country, no matter who wins.
What do you think about how the Democratic Party reached the decision in convincing Biden to step down? This was really a coup d'etat.
We repeatedly heard that if Biden was going to withdraw from the race, that pressure was going to have to come from his very close circle. People say, there's a handful of family members and really close advisors that Biden really listens to closely, and it really wouldn't matter how many members of Congress, how many Democrats were calling for him to step down, that at the end of the day, that really had to come from the people that he trusts the most. And I think what happened was as more and more Democrats across the board were calling for him to step down, that then members of that inner circle started to say, all right, it's time, you got to pull out. But sadly, I feel for Democrats that, and members of Biden's campaign, I think only about maybe 60 seconds before the announcement went out, he posted on X that, hey, I'm stepping down. They learned the news, and I think many of them were very devastated because for so long they were hearing from Biden, I'm all in, this consistency, and then that quickly to have him out. But in Biden's defense, you have to run all the way until you're not running. You have to be in it fully until you're not. But it certainly has thrown the Democrat Party into a lot of disarray, and I think we're seeing a lot of fracturing. And the question is, can the Democrats get it together and build those bridges and mend where there is that hurt and where there is right now those big gaps of separation? Can that be mended before November?
This was really a seismic shift. It was an earthquake.
It was.
Kierran, just no doubt about it. And how do you think President Biden's decision not to run is going to impact the Democratic Party's strategy going forward to their convention and afterwards?
Well, I believe the Democratic Party is going to use Kamala Harris to try to prosecute a case against President Trump in front of the American people that's just not in the courtroom. Instead, I believe they should be focusing on jobs in the economy, which I believe would actually help them see better poll numbers in some of the battleground states. But I don't think that's where her focus is going to be. I feel like she's going to be very narrowly focused on the fact that, she's running against a convicted felon and that she somehow has the right ideas for the country. And I don't necessarily know what policy positions they are going to take that are going to move us forward and help to rebuild America's economy.
You know, Bruce, where does both parties stand when it comes to health care reform?
Well, the Republican flank stopped calling for the repeal of Obamacare, right? So I don't know whether they've kind of given up since Obamacare, in my judgment, still is something that tries to substitute, government choices for free market, and health costs continue to skyrocket. It's not all because of Obamacare, but it certainly created an almost government control entirely of the health industry with Medicare and Medicaid and Obamacare. Probably 90% of all of our health expenditures are in some sense connected with government. There have been a few efforts to try to limit the prices of very expensive drugs, insulin, put price caps on them, but they've not gone very far because the pharmaceutical industry is so politically powerful. So I think that if either side could come up with a plan that's an improvement on the existing situation, they would get a huge following. But I don't see that there's much difference between the two parties as long as Obamacare remains the centerpiece of our healthcare industry.
Now, Virginia, you and I both attended the Republican convention last week in Milwaukee. And I think what was most impactful were the Gold Star families, the victims of the fentanyl crisis, the victims of the illegals coming in this country. When the New York mother told her story about her son coming out the battlefield back home and how he was stabbed, you could even see the president in tears when Rachel Morin's brother talked about how she was savagely beaten and her life taken away. I mean, you could just feel the emotions. And at some point, listen, the border is an albatross around the vice president's neck. I just don't know how she's going to earn the trust, because this is the #1 issue, and say to voters, you can trust me on this issue, but what rhetoric can they trust her with? What is she going to say when it comes to addressing immigration and border security?
I do not know how she can dig herself out of the hole she has put herself in on the border. She was named the border czar, and I've been to the border many more times than Vice President Kamala Harris has in my reporting for the Daily Signal. We know exactly what we will get from Kamala Harris if she becomes president, and that's more of the same, because as the borders are, she has allowed the borders to remain wide open, more than 10 million encounters on our southern border, 2 million plus gotaways. We have no idea how many unknown gotaways, record numbers of individuals on the terrorist watch list showing up at the border. Fentanyl is now the leading cause of death among individuals 18 to 45 in the United States. That's my generation, my friends. It's becoming more and more common for individuals to, only be like 1 degree of separation away from someone who has been poisoned by fentanyl. And at the same time, we also know what we'll get from former President Donald Trump on the border if he becomes the 47th president, because we saw what he did when he was president in relation to the border. And he's been very honest and open about this. He'll re-implement Remain in Mexico. He'll restart construction of the border wall. And many of the individuals who were leading his initiatives on the border, folks like Tom Homan and Mark Morgan, I think we're going to see them reinstituted within a Trump administration, and those policies that he had, he'll probably only go further. Big questions remain on the deportation. He says, we're going to deport those who have come in under a Biden administration. This is an issue that a lot of folks are asking, okay, how would that actually be done? I asked at the RNC, at the Republican National Convention, I got to talk to Mark Morgan, the former acting commissioner of Customs and Border Protection, and I asked him this. I was like, how do you actually go about deporting millions of individuals who have come into the country over the past 4 years? And he sort of tongue-in-cheek said, well, one at a time. And he was like, you have to start somewhere. And the fact is, we're a nation of laws, and you have to start enforcing those laws. And the message under a Trump administration will be that there are consequences for breaking the laws at our southern border. So we know what we'll get on both sides. We'll get, if it's Kamala Harris, we'll get more of exactly what we've got in the past 4 years. And if it's Trump, we'll get what we got in the previous years before that.
Kierran, she does seem to be obsessed with DEI, LGBTQ race issues. It seems those are the things when she's speaking, these are the things that she's got the most publicity on over her years as vice president. How does she need to rein those issues in, balance it out? Because, you know, DEI is under assault. If you look at the numbers, when you think about these biological males, when you think about the gender affirming in the classroom, many Americans are just pushing against us now. It's just not a winning issue if you want to bring voters in other than those that were going to vote for you in the first place. It's not an issue that's going to really bring the independents to your party to vote in November. Kierran? Kierran, I tell you what, let me take a break. Obviously, we have a few issues here, but that happens in life, right? We're going to take a break and come back. Don't go away.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
So let me come back to Kierran. So in other words, Kierran, how does she balance these social justice policies and other reforms that she tackles as a candidate, whether it's DEI, gender affirming, LGBTQ? How does she balance this out where she doesn't push voters away, but bring them into her path? At least they would consider voting for her in November.
It's going to be very difficult, Armstrong. One of the problems is that these are key planks in the Democratic Party's platform that we voted on in a direction that we moved in post-Obama. I believe that the Obama message was much more focused on kitchen table issues like getting people health care, jobs, the economy. He stayed very, very focused on that. But I do not think that this current iteration of the Democratic Party has those same principles at heart. And I believe they lead on abortion. They lead on LGBTQ issues and bathroom issues. And it turns off a certain segment of our country. It just does. But I believe that they have to pivot back to jobs, the economy, bringing jobs back to America and putting people back to work, as well as tackling the fentanyl crisis, as well as tackling the issues on the border. I think that we also need to talk about how in some of our democratic cities, we have a problem with the lack of police. We have a serious issue with, mayors of major cities, Democrat mayors of major cities cutting from police budgets in order to fund other pet projects. And I think that's a major issue that we need to tackle in this country as well.
Bruce Fein, the elephant in the room is the Supreme Court. How will the Supreme Court decisions impact the November elections? And also, before immediately following President Biden's debacle, his debate and his appearance on George Stephanopoulos, he started honing in on the Supreme Court about passing legislation, even though we know that is the third branch of government and checks and balances. Will she continue this attack on the Supreme Court? And will the Supreme Court, in terms of the abortion issues and other issues, Trump's immunity, limited immunity, will it have an impact with voters in the November election?
Well, it depends in part on whether or not Kamala Harris follows up on Biden's flirtations with amending the Constitution, packing the Supreme Court by changing the number, and attacking the court in general for its decisions. Now, we have past experience with Franklin Roosevelt, who, unlike Biden, was the most popular president in history at that time in 1936, and he was sorely defeated when he tried to expand the court from 9 to 15 to pack it. So even though I believe that the court has lost some prestige over the years, it's still probably among the three branches, heads and shoulders above Congress and the legislature. So they try to put tampering with the court on the agenda, I think it'll really hurt the Democrats. In general, I mean, we have one of the justices appointed by Biden. 3 of them were appointed by Trump. They disagreed on that major decision with regard to presidential immunity. But I think that, to most American voters, is going to be kind of remote. I think the decisions that it makes are too removed. And I do think, however, that the one area where the Republicans, I think, will lose a little bit will be on the abortion issue, where this was clearly a Trump boast that he appointed justices that overruled Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood, the right of abortion. And if you take the popular referenda, about 6 or 7 since that decision, where abortion has been left to the people, even in moderate conservative states, Kansas, Ohio, the pro-choice people have lost resoundingly. So that's one of the issues, I think, that could work a little bit in favor of the Democrats. But overall, I wouldn't want to overstate how important the Supreme Court is in the minds of the typical voter. It generally comes back largely to the economic issue.
Ms. Allen, would you like to comment on that?
On the abortion issue specifically?
Yeah.
I think many Americans will always choose to vote for the conservative candidate because of the life issue. I still think that there are many Americans that pick their candidate based on the issue of abortion and based on the life issue. And even though we might be at a point where we're not going to see at a federal level drastic shifts on the issue of abortion, I do think that on both sides of the aisle, a lot of Americans are going to go to the polls with that in mind. So I do agree with Bruce in regards to the fact that it's an issue that we have seen on ballot measures in states across the U.S. that a lot of those pro-life ballot measures did fail. And that is, people have pointed to, increased funding for the pro-abortion movement, things like that. But I think it's also very telling of just where the nation stands on this issue right now. And at the end of the day, there will always be Americans that say, okay, no matter what, that's always my number one issue. Speaking specifically about conservative, specifically about Christian voters, they will always have that be one of the very top issues in their consideration as they're headed to the polls.
So Mr. Young, how are foreign policy and national security being discussed in this 2024 election?
I don't think they've gotten a chance to get around to that. I think they're really just trying to hone what Kamala Harris is going to say. When she was Joe Biden's vice president, Joe Biden had positions that he took that she had to follow along with. So I very much expect her to pivot and change on some of her, previous statements, just like with this Israel, fiasco where she's not attending the joint session of Congress. I think that she's going to have to move on certain issues in order to get certain people support, certain constituency group support. So I look for her to focus on domestic issues and then try and focus on being the president if she actually does get elected president. I don't think right now, we have a saying, politics ends at the water's edge, and I think I'm done.
Attorney Fein, what are the strengths of candidate Harris and Trump? The strengths and the weaknesses of both?
Well, I don't know. I'm inclined to remind myself of Dwight Eisenhower. He asked, what are the strengths of Richard Nixon when he was running after Eisenhower's second term? He said, give me a couple of weeks, I'll think of them. I don't think that if we go back to the founding fathers, either candidate really is a powerful, a majestic figure. Obviously, we have Mr. Trump. I think he hits the right note when it comes to at least deregulating the government into every nook and cranny of our life, although he continues to spy on us all like all the other presidents have. And I do think at least has some sensible understanding we can't have complete open borders, that there has to be, if there's to be immigration, it should be legal. And he certainly has an energy level and vitality to him that certainly Joe Biden never had, and I don't believe Kamala Harris has. So at least with regard to at least his group, he has charisma. I don't think charisma is a name that comes to mind in thinking about Kamala Harris. On the other hand, what does she have? Well, she comes from, she has mixed ancestry. So the minority groups look to her as like Obama, the first time we had a black elected president. And there may be many in America who think, well, I just would like to have, a woman elected for the first time. It just makes me feel better, even if it has nothing to do with their economic circumstances. That psychology is a boost. I'm not sure she's the best candidate to make that pitch. In some sense, in the ironic way, Trump won in 2016 because he wasn't Hillary Clinton, So, I mean, we have candidates I don't think that really are giants in their field and are going to make their supporters believe that they're bringing in, a whole new chapter. It's going to be changes, in my judgment, more at the margins. So that's where we are. My own view is that it's unfortunate that neither candidate, I believe, really has the strength and the vision to take us out of a very, very deep situation where I think our infrastructure, our economy, our stature, especially the educational level, is crumbling.
Well, one thing that we cannot ignore, Ms. Allen, that Trump's escaping an assassin's bullet and his defiant way of dealing with it has literally made him a mythical figure.
It created a ton of energy, and we both felt that, the Republican National Convention, that there is fresh energy behind Trump because of now that image that is going to go down in history with his fist raised and blood on his face. And I think there were a lot of people that weren't maybe very excited about this election. Maybe they were going to vote for Trump. Maybe they were just going to sleep in that morning of the election. I think that a presidential candidate, former president, surviving an assassination attempt really does produce a lot of energy, and I think we're seeing that right now. Now, the question mark is how long does that last, right? Because things change so fast in politics, so we'll see how long that energy stays high. But there was a strength in that moment that America saw in former President Donald Trump that is a strength that as a nation I think we have been sorely missing now for a very, very long time.
I find it interesting that former President Donald Trump's legacy may be he's the reason why we never had our first woman president of the United States. First with Hillary and now with Vice President Kamala Harris. You read between those lines, but I want to thank you so much for joining us. I want to thank Mr. Young and Attorney Fein. Have a good night.